a real mixed bag. And I don't think, I'm not one of those people who think that the social network executives are all necessarily acting in bad faith. I think depending on the platform, you've got folks in charge who care about this issue and who don't care, right? But things like what Facebook did recently, very recently, with QAnon seem to be really broad, massive action, right? Like there isn't anybody that I follow in the QAnon scholar space who doesn't think what Facebook did was a big deal. Basically gutted QAnon's ability to communicate on Facebook in any sort of scale. So that is something, right? Some of the stuff that Facebook has done around the political ad disclaimers, I think makes it more difficult for smaller candidates and for folks to participate in that process, and makes it easier for just massive organizations to participate. So I don't know that makes their democracy any stronger. And I think that that's a really complicated, issue. I don't know what I would do in Facebook's shoes exactly. But I think that the tagging of Trump's tweets and Facebook posts when they have medical disinformation makes a lot of sense, and they should continue doing that. And election disinformation and things that are nonpartisan. But when you get into a back and forth around a lot of issues, there isn't like a clear-cut line. Certainly politicians have lied about tax policy since the beginning of time. Are we gonna censor post where a politician makes a claim about tax policy that we think is incorrect? Who's going to say that is? Is it Facebook's board that's going to decide if this is tax policy post? How does that all play out in reality? I don't know the answer to that.
So do you think private citizens and institutions can effectively regulate disinformation without government regulation?
I think the people need to tell the platforms, what they want to have happen. And look, the government has been challenging the platforms to do more. They've been calling them in and shaming them in front of, and virtually, I guess at this point, in front of Congress, right? To talk about disinformation and talk about security issues. I could see regulation around foreign actors. So when clear foreign actors are trying to get into conversations online, I think that would probably be a pretty clear-cut way that the federal government could intervene with regulations that would not stifle any of the freedom of speech of U.S. citizens here talking about our elections, because I wouldn't want to do that. But if the question is, do I think that the platforms and organizations can regulate themselves about disinformation? I don't think that they have the market incentives to do that unless people demand it, and we just have to be really vocal that we want hate speech and disinformation off of these platforms. And I haven't actually seen a real organized push to do that, which is sort of interesting. I know that a lot of brands performatively got off Facebook advertising for 30 days in response to something like this, and it happened for 30 days, and then they went back on, and that's not obviously going to be enough to force force Facebook to do anything. It has to really come from users, and it has to come from millions and millions of users for it to be really effective. You could use Facebook to organize that.
So, for those that may not know, the law in the United States that prevents the government from being able to regulate these platforms and holding them liable is actually established by the FCC. So, Ryan, this is probably our most direct policy question. Do you believe that the FCC should remove the ban on platforms not being held liable for the content published on their sites?
It's really complicated. I supported this in the 90s as a teenager, because the idea of starting a website and then getting a lot of users and then being responsible for the content those users posted on your site opened up a can of worms that, made you not want to start would Web 2.0 ever happened if those regulations were in place? So I'm not convinced that they should do that. I think there are probably other ways that we could approach this as a society that does not make companies responsible for the content that they are posting.
Give our listeners a little bit more advice on how to prevent themselves from being a propagator of disinformation. Why don't people just Google their sources, and is that just, enough to prevent disinformation?
Right. So one of the things the government could do is in public schools make sure that critical thinking and social media slash media literacy is something that's taught. Right. In other countries, I know that students are taught to look for multiple sources. They're taught to understand who the sources of information are. We should be much more aggressive with that in teaching folks about what is a real source and what is not a real source on the internet, how to check that, how to look to see if a person is credible and real. So those things, I think, people can teach themselves, but also we should be teaching, as a society, we should be teaching folks those skills. As a user right now, don't share something that you haven't clicked and vetted yourself. If it smells fishy, Google around and see if it is. I so often, you'll see a piece of content, and within 1 minute, you can Google around to the appropriate keywords and find multiple sites debunking it. Multiple credible sites debunking it. So I think that is something that folks can do. And I follow a lot of my friends from high school's parents on Facebook, and they're some conservative Trump supporting folks, and they constantly share things that are demonstrably false. And have no interest or not, you're not even able to communicate or engage with them to make them understand that it's demonstrably false, even if you post a direct rebuttal. So getting the back and forth with people, I don't know how effective that is, but it's super important to normalize and talk about things that we know are true. Like, say, I'm making a plan to vote, and I'm going to vote by mail. I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, and that's a safe, effective thing to do. I'm going to get a vaccine because it's a safe, effective thing to do. So I think as much as folks can learn to model behaviors online that are positive, and share things that they want to have out in the conversation, and not just let the digital discourse go to the people who are spreading disinformation. I think that's something people can do. They can be a positive part of the social conversation, and it's hard because we're all human, and it's much easier to start a fight on Twitter, and I know that I've done that my share of times, but it's much more constructive to try to be a positive force for the content of the conversation. So that's what I would leave folks with.
Yeah, this has been an excellent interview. Thank you so much for doing this with us, Ryan.
Thank you for listening to Civic Tech 101. Our team members are Elisa Chen, Jin Choi, Sabrina Fields, Hannah Morin, Jacob Lepic, and Marley Rosario. Special thanks to the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago.